Many of you have heard Jamie and Danny's talks in the last weeks, on chapters 1 to 4, but some of you may have missed some. Some may be visiting, and I know our youth are sitting in this morning, so I thought I'd do a very quick recap. Esther is a historical book in the Old Testament. It's a story of a Jewish community living as a minority group in exile. There had been a chance for the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem, but not all of them had returned due to family or other commitments. They were in the Persian Empire during the reign of King Ahasuerus, Xerxes. So the context. We're talking about 400 to 500 years BC. And you may all be experts in pre-Jesus geography of the world, but I wasn't, so we have a lovely map here. The Persian Empire was massive. I had no idea it was this big. We're not talking about some tiny tucked away kingdom, but a world player. What King Ahasuerus said and did really, really mattered. Susa, the capital city, is based in modern-day Iran, a little bit above inland of the top of the Persian Gulf. And this is where our story unfolds. So the book starts with King Ahasuerus holding a 6-month party. At the end of it, he asks Queen Vashti to come. He wants to show her off, parade her in front of his drunken friends. However, she has a strop, refuses to go, and this leads to her being fired as the queen. Fast forward 4 years, the king returns to Susa after an unsuccessful military campaign. And who knows, perhaps to cheer himself up, he decides to hold a beauty contest. This is to choose the new queen, and Esther is chosen. But really importantly, no one in the palace knows that she's Jewish. We've heard in the last few weeks that Haman was the king's right-hand man. He believes the whole world should bow down to him. But Mordecai, who's Esther's cousin, completely refuses to do it. Now, Haman is outraged, has a ridiculously over-the-top reaction to this, and gets King Ahasuerus to sign off on all the Jews being killed. Mordecai gets word to Esther and asks her to go to the king and beg for mercy for her people. But Esther is only allowed to go to see the king when she's called for, not whenever she feels like a chat. It's been over 30 days since she was last asked for. And in fact, she risks her life by going in front of the king when she's not been requested. Several messages go backwards and forth, and then we get this famous line in Esther 4:14, and Mordecai says to her, "Who knows if perhaps you were made queen such a time as this?" In response, Esther asks for all the Jews in Susa to fast and pray for 3 days. The chapter ends with a bit of a cliffhanger, as Esther says, "And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die." Right, hopefully we're all now up to speed. On to chapter 5. So chapter 5 has 2 main sections. The first, Esther's request to the king. That's verse 1 to 8. And then the second, where Haman plans to kill Mordecai, verses 9 to 14. So, starting with verse 1. On the 3rd day of the fast, Esther puts on her royal robes and enters the inner court of the palace, just across from the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne facing the entrance. I can't imagine the stress Esther was under when she got up that day. The killing of the Jews was already set in law. This was the law of the Medes and the Persians, known as laws that can never be broken. She, along with all the Jews, were counting down the days of their lives. But in going towards the king that day, this could literally be the last day of her life. She put on her royal robes and went to the inner court of the palace. She made sure she was fully prepared and looking her best. When reflecting on this, I realised how important this was. If I'd rocked up this morning, having rolled out of bed, not brushed my hair, wearing my PJs and dressing gown, it might have been a bit distracting from what I'm trying to say. So, Esther had prepared spiritually and emotionally by fasting, and we presume praying, but also physically in getting ready. She wanted to be accepted by the king and didn't want her appearance to be a distraction, but a message to demonstrate, I am your queen, worthy of your time and attention. This is, however, a complete contrast to the way in which we are able to approach God. God is more mighty, powerful, awe-inspiring, I could go on, than any earthly king has ever been. Yet, God calls us to come before him just as we are. Because of Jesus, we don't have to sacrifice animals, wear special clothes, or meet with God in a temple. We can talk to him anytime, anywhere, and know that he is always interested in what we've got to say. God accepts us when we're on top of the world, as well as when we're struggling or when we've messed up. We don't have to put on our Sunday best or pretend to be someone we're not to be accepted by God. He wants a real relationship with us. Now, we heard in chapter 4 last week, Mordecai said to Esther, if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. Our God is sovereign. He will bring his plans into action. He wants to use us, but if we're not willing, he will find another way. But in not taking God's path, we may not see the benefit of those plans. However, those willing to serve God in a sacrificial way see him working in incredible ways through them. We see this time and time again in the Bible. God uses the obedience of Moses to help the Israelites escape from the Egyptians and destroy the army. We see the obedience of Gideon and his army of just 300 defeat the Midianites when statistically they had no hope. We see David, a lad in his early teens who can't even stand up under the weight of adult armour, defeat 9-foot-tall Goliath against all the odds. And now here, in the book of Esther, the fate of the Jewish people rests in the hands of a young woman at a time when women's views and values are not particularly respected. In all these examples, we see people chosen by God, faithful to him, who make a massive difference. They're often not the first people who'd be automatically chosen in the eyes of the world. But God saw their heart and willingness to follow him, despite their own fears and preconceptions, and they obeyed him, and we see God's work coming into power. Right, on to verse 2. I promise it will speed up. It's not going to take all day. So, we heard in next page. The king extends God his royal scepter. Wait a second. No. When he saw Queen Esther standing there in the inner court, he welcomed her and held out his gold scepter to her. So, Esther approached and took the end of the scepter. The king extends his royal scepter, showing his acceptance of Esther. Had he not done this, Esther would have been arrested and immediately executed. Esther found favour and grace in the eyes of the king, and we also see examples of people being saved by the grace and favour of God throughout the Bible. Paul wrote in Ephesians chapter 2, "For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this not from yourselves. It's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." We're reminded of the parallel of Esther coming into the presence of the king, and for us when we come into the presence of God. All of us have done wrong and sinned. It's only by God's grace, Jesus taking the punishment we deserve by dying on the cross, that allows us not to die, but have eternal life in relationship with God. This relationship allows us to put our requests in prayer to God. And King Ahasuerus shows his grace and favour to Esther allowing her to put her request to him. Verses 3 and 4. Then the king asked her, "What do you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? I'll give it to you, even if it's half the kingdom." And Esther replied, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I've prepared for the king." Half the kingdom sounds like a bit of an unusual thing to offer, particularly when we remember how massive Persia is. However, it's generally thought this expression means, whatever you want, I'll give it to you. When I first read this, my immediate thought was, hooray, now is the time. Say what you need, let's get this done. But what was Esther doing? The opportunity was handed to her on a silver platter, wasn't it? Was she scared? Probably. But I don't think that's why she didn't ask then. Esther was wise, wiser than me. She knew the king and his priorities. I have definitely made the mistake of accosting John the minute I walk through the door with, "We need to make a decision on X," or "How about Y?" And he just looks at me and I'm like, maybe you can identify with me and realise this doesn't always go down so well. However, if we're sitting down with no time pressure, particularly after a meal, we're much more likely to have a helpful discussion. Also, she knew King Ahasuerus loved a banquet. If we recall back to the beginning of the story, it was a 6-month banquet which kicked the whole story off. Additionally, Esther invited him to a private banquet. It was likely the royal court was filled with people and really busy. Not really the best time to tell him about her being Jewish or to ask for a U-turn on a royal decree. Verse 5. The king turned to his attendants and said, "Tell Haman to come quickly to a banquet, as Esther has requested." So the king and Haman went to Esther's banquet. We get the impression that King Ahasuerus is quite an impulsive guy. He gets rid of Queen Vashti in an angry moment. Having not seen Esther in over 30 days, he offers her anything she wants, not having a clue what she's going to ask for. He drops everything to attend her banquet and tells Haman he needs to do the same. He acts and reacts quickly to everything around him, in contrast to Esther's planned approach. Verses 6 and 7. And while they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, "Now, tell me what you really want. What is your request? I'll give it to you, even if it's half the kingdom." Esther replied, "This is my request and deepest wish. If I have found favour with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I ask, please come with Haman tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for you. Then I will explain what this is all about." Again, Esther seems to bottle it. In what appears to be the perfect time to ask the king to save the Jews, she remains silent and asks for yet another banquet. What we and Esther don't know at this stage is that this is all part of God's perfect timing, and another day is needed for all the pieces of God's plan to fall into place. I'll stop there though, because otherwise you'll have spoilers for next week. So, let's think for a minute about how Esther must have been feeling. She's just sat through a banquet with her mortal enemy, and now she plans to do it again. I don't know about you, but I can find it really difficult to be even in the same room as someone if they've really upset me, let alone make small talk. As I was reflecting on this, I was reminded of Psalm 23. So bear with me, I'm just going to read it through because I love this psalm. "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies and anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I found this psalm so comforting on so many occasions, but I was drawn to verse 5 when reading Esther. You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. I'm reminded again of how God's presence was with Esther in this difficult situation, and how he goes with us when we're struggling into difficult situations too. He's there comforting us, preparing us, and blessing us, even when life does not seem to be going according to plan. There are times where circumstances can dictate, or we're called to interact with people around us who've hurt us. It can be really, really hard. But God's grace and forgiveness can spill over from us to other people and have a huge impact. John and I were really fortunate recently to be able to visit Rome. As part of that, we went to the Vatican and went to see all the Pope's previous carriages and cars. It's slightly ridiculous, but amazing. As part of this exhibition, there is a video about the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II in 1981. He was shot in the abdomen and the hand, lost a lot of blood, and required emergency surgery. But following that shooting, the Pope asked people, "Pray for my brother, who I have sincerely forgiven." The Pope then chose to meet and talk with the shooter in prison in 1983, and again, this was filmed and he was very open with his showing his forgiveness. It was interesting as it appeared that they seemed to develop a friendship, and when Pope came to the end of his life, the guy wrote to him and wished him well. You see that change of heart from somebody who wanted somebody dead to wishing them well, and that's through the power of forgiveness. I was really moved by this demonstrations of God's love in action, and it challenged me to think, how often do I pray forgiveness and blessing on people who've hurt me? Are there people in my life who I need to show more grace? As I reflected on this, I recalled Romans 12:21. Don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good. Right, back to the Esther again, verses 9 to 11. Haman was a happy man as he left the banquet. But when he saw Mordecai sitting at the palace gates, not standing up or trembling nervously before him, Haman became furious. However, he restrained himself and went on home. Haman gathered together his friends and Zeresh's wife and boasted to them about his great wealth, his many children. He bragged about the honours the king had given him and how he had been promoted above all the other nobles. Then Haman added, "And that's not all. Queen Esther invited only me and the king himself to a banquet she had prepared for us. And she has invited me to dine with her again tomorrow." Then he added, "But this is all worth nothing as long as I see Mordecai the Jew is just sitting there at the palace gate." When Haman went by, it would have been a natural reaction for Mordecai to be scared. Haman was a really powerful man, and he clearly expected people to stand up when he entered a room, bow down to him, or at the very least tremble in his presence. But Mordecai does none of these things. His trust was in God and God's provision, even in these difficult times. In Psalm 56, and verse 4 is also quoted in Hebrews, it says, "But when I'm afraid, I will put my trust in you. I praise God for what he has promised. I trust God, so why should I be afraid? What can mere mortals do to me?" Reading this encourages me to keep coming back to God in prayer. Keep praying about the difficult circumstances in my life, particularly when I can't easily see a way through or an answer. Our faith in God is not dictated by our circumstances. God wants to be with us, loving us and supporting us through it all. Back to Haman. He should be so happy. So many things in his life are going really, really well. But we read here that he was furious because of Mordecai. However, he restrained himself. I think this is another place where we see God working behind the scenes. Haman was the second most powerful man in the kingdom. I expect he could have had Mordecai killed instantly for his apparent lack of respect. But he didn't and stormed home rather than act on it. I can only imagine it was God working in him because God knew how events were going to unfold and the timing wasn't right. But at home, Haman brags about basically every area of his life to his wife and friends. It does amuse me slightly that he boasts about his many children to his wife, who you imagine would probably know. But with all the success, why does the behaviour of one man infuriate him so much? Haman's whole life and value was based on power, position, and possessions. But this value shatters in the face of just one person. We see this in our society today. People crave fame, fortune, money, power. But sometimes we see when people actually achieve their goals, there's still a hole there. There's something missing. It wasn't all they thought it would be. In contrast, others with very little status in the world's eyes can have hope, peace, and joy because their value is in who God sees them to be. The reality is, if Haman got rid of Mordecai, it wouldn't be long before somebody else or something else came up and made him feel worthless again. He was proud. He wanted everything his way. Nobody was going to stop him. But underneath all this success, he must have been incredibly insecure. Why else would he feel the need to boast about every accomplishment and everything going well when he could have just sat back, relaxed, and enjoyed the benefit of this, what had been happening? We all know that pride comes before a fall, and there's not many clearer examples of this than we see with Haman, but we'll find out a bit more about that as the story unfolds. So verse 14. So Haman's wife Zeresh and all his friends suggested, set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet high. Then in the morning ask the king to impale Mordecai on it. When this is done, you can go on your merry way to the banquet, king. This pleased Haman, and he ordered the pole set up. Haman had already put the wheels in motion for the killing of all the Jews in the kingdom, which would obviously include Mordecai. But this wasn't enough. He wanted Mordecai to have a public and humiliating execution. Haman had surrounded himself with people who affirmed and supported him, even when his thoughts and ideas were bad. His friends and family didn't challenge him like Mordecai challenged Esther when she was afraid of going before the king, but inflated his ego further. Although on the surface it looked like they were loving and supporting him, they were actually causing him harm. When learning more about this passage, I read, when you enable your loved one's pride, you do so to their detriment. It's so important for us to have people around us who can speak truth into our lives and gently challenge us when it's needed. Do you have those people? Are you responsive if people challenge you on your thoughts and actions? Jamie mentioned previously, the book of Esther is really unusual. God's name is not mentioned once. But despite that, we see God's hand working behind the scenes to bring his plans into place. The Bible Project says, God's seeming absence does not mean that he's abandoned his people. He uses the faithfulness of even morally compromised people living in a messy world to accomplish his purposes, and fulfill his promises. The book asks us to trust God even when we can't see him working, and to hold to the confident hope that no matter how bad things get, God is actively working to redeem his world. I'm going to end with a few questions for just to reflect on. If the band are happy to come up and play, that would be awesome. So I'll read them out and then, What does God want to do in your life? Is he calling you to speak out or step out in faith in a new way? Are you struggling with anxiety or fear and need a reminder that God is with you in these difficult times? Have you got people around you who will spur you on in your journey to become more like Jesus and be honest with you? Or are you struggling to forgive someone and aware this is having a huge impact on your life? As the guys play for us, I just really encourage you to just spend a few moments talking honestly with God. It may be about what I've spoken about today, some of these questions, or actually God may have put something completely different on your heart. But just take a moment, talk to him, ask him what he wants to be saying to you.